So that real question is, well, okay, fine. So some people get better fasting, but is it safe? Is fasting safe? Can you really put people on water-only fasting for up to 40 days safely? So to answer that question, we began to do a study, and that study is a fasting safety study. It was eventually published here, the MCP Complementary Alternative Medicine. This is about a year ago. Looks like 2006. No. What's the date on there? 2018, so 6 months ago, not 6 years ago. So in this study, what we did was we took 5 consecutive years where every patient, every day, every symptom was carefully charted utilizing a specific standard that's used for safety studies. It's the common terminology criteria for adverse events from the National Cancer Institute. So we used their standard and collected their data. The CATCAE grading system uses 5 grades: mild, moderate, severe. 4 is life-threatening, and 5 is death. So you have to mark every patient, every day, all of their symptoms according to the standard. It was quite exhaustive. It took a lot of work on the part of our staff to do this, because this was before we had our fancy automated computer system that we now have. And we found there was 5,949 adverse events during fasting. Most of those were mild to moderate. Unfortunately, as you can see, there was 0 Category 5 events, no deaths. There was 1 Category 4 event. That's a potentially serious event. That was actually a hyponatremia event. The person's blood sodium went low enough that we had to put intravenous fluids in order to bring it back. The person did fine, but potentially a serious event. On the Category 3 events, of the 310 events, 95 of them were hypertensive crises. Now, what's interesting is you think, well, why, if blood pressure's, fasting's so good for treating high blood pressure, why would you have a hypertensive crisis during fasting? Well, the way it works is every day you have a blood pressure over 160 is considered an adverse event according to the CATAE criteria. So if the person starts off at 220, and the next day they're 200, and the next day they're 180, and the next day they're 170, each one of those numbers, each one of those days is an adverse event. So even though they're clearly getting better, it still counts as an adverse event. So you have to read the fine line on how this stuff is done. And in this case, a third of our Category 3 events were actually people's blood pressure normalizing. 95% of events are mild to moderate, and most importantly, they are expected during fasting. Low back pain, headache, nausea. These are all things that are generated by the body in the process of getting well. They're not clinically adverse problems. And what's interesting, up till the time we did the study, first of all, nobody could get approval from Human Subjects Committee to do long-term water fasting because there had been no safety study done. And no Human Subjects Committee will approve a study if there's not a safety study done. That's kind of the first thing that has to be done. So we were able to do that. And up until that time, nobody over 65 years old could be allowed to fast because they were too old. How many people over 65? So they would say, you're too old to fast. Well, we did this study and we found out that although there was a slight correlation between age and adverse events, there was not a correlation between severity and adverse event, which means there was no more danger because you're older than younger to do fasting using this protocol. And as a consequence, now people are able to get a broader range of patients able to do this in a federally chartered IRB because we have safety data that supports its use. So this was actually a really important study, not just for us, but also for all the other researchers now that are showing interest in long-term water-only fasting. Now, since then, we've actually funded our own sponsored IRB. We have a federally chartered IRB with federal-wide assurance with people that are staffed that know stuff about fasting. And so we can submit to that IRB now for future studies, and there's experts that actually can evaluate patient safety without going through some of the long delays when people are just terrified of the idea of somebody not eating. People are so afraid of fasting, they think if you get on a plane here in New York and you fly to California, you will die over Colorado if you don't eat the peanuts. They think those pretzels saved their life. So How is it that fasting is working? How is it possible that doing nothing, essentially, can be the most effective treatment that's been shown in treating the leading cause of death and disability? What's going on here? What percentage of people lose weight that fast? 100%? That sounds quacky, doesn't it? But it's true. The laws of physics and thermodynamics tell you if you don't fast, you're going to lose weight. Everybody that fasts loses weight. Average weight loss is a pound a day. Everybody that goes in fasting gets a natriuresis, the selective elimination of this toxic chemical sodium, also essential nutrient sodium, from the body. When people have too much of it in there, it comes out very rapidly. This is a much more powerful effect than taking something like hydrochlorothiazide or some diuretic or something. You get a flushing. That's why people see dramatic weight loss sometimes early on, because not only does the salt come out, but the excess fluid that's there to protect your body from the excess amount of salt comes out. As the fluid goes down, the blood volume goes down, so blood pressure goes down, the swelling, the non-healing wounds start to heal, the congestive heart failure starts to ease. Are people really toxic? Is that true? Are there like PCB and dioxin and pesticide residues and heavy metals built up inside your cells? And does that matter? Yeah, it turns out it does. And in fact, fasting is so efficient at allowing the body to mobilize and detoxify itself that some people try to tell you it's dangerous, unless you take their proprietary products. They're going to sell you some $39 a bottle pill that somehow now makes it safe. Well, we found actually the body is very well equipped to rapidly mobilize and eliminate these materials without having to take $39 or $139 products in order to make it happen. There's two types of toxins that you're concerned about, exogenous and endogenous. Exogenous are the PCB, pesticide residues, all that stuff. Endogenous are normal intermediary products of metabolism that may be there in excess quantity. Okay, and so it turns out fasting is helpful at mobilizing all of these materials rapidly. It's also why sometimes fasting can be an intense and miserable experience, because you're rapidly going through this detoxifying process. It's not always fun. It's what I call entertaining. Fasting protects normal cells. According to Walter Longo, published in the journal Metabolism 2015, the combination of fasting and chemotherapy results in dramatically higher cancer-free survival than chemotherapy alone. In other words, if you combine fasting, fasting protects healthy cells from the ravages of chemotherapy. Fasting makes cancer cells more vulnerable to treatment of all kinds. Enzymes are used both for detoxification. How do you think those toxins get out? It's all enzymatically driven. Fasting induces those enzyme systems. And fasting also induces the enzymatic systems necessary for things like fat mobilization and glycogen mobilization. You know, lipolysis is an enzymatically driven process. Every time you fast, you get better at detoxifying. And those enzymatic pathways that are catalyzed persist even after fasting. You're not just detoxifying when you're fasting. You're detoxifying the days, the weeks, the months after. And if you do something really dangerous and radical, like adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet, get regular sleep and exercise, you can continue to detoxify faster than you accumulate the toxins, particularly if you get off the greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh and highly processed foods. The whole point is, as long as you're getting healthy faster than you're getting sick, you get well. If you're getting sick faster than you're getting healthy, then it's called aging, deterioration, and death. Fasting is a useful tool at rapidly reversing this process. And we know it's true in animals because you can take rats and you can double their lifespan with periodic fasting or systematic underfeeding. In fact, if you look at the life extension protocols that are out there, the only thing that's been reliably shown to extend life in animals and humans is calorie reduction and fasting. There is no pill, potion, or powder that's been shown reliable to function on a life extension basis. Insulin is a hormone that drives sugar from the bloodstream into the cells. What happens if you can't drive your sugar to the cells where it's needed? Blood sugars go up, we call it diabetes. That's what diabetes mellitus is. You have enough insulin, it's just not working. And remember, your primary fuel, your natural fuel, what you're designed to burn is sugar. And the best way to get that sugar is from plant-based complex carbohydrates. The problem with taking sugar in a simple form is it causes havoc because it disrupts the microflora, it drives your insulin levels, you get a completely different kind of reaction. Even something like fruit, which are hybridized to be high sugar, lower fiber foods, need to be taken with vegetable material, lettuce, celery, cucumbers, fiber, to slow down the rate with which the sugar is absorbed for those of you that are sensitive to that type of an issue. So if we're giving fruit to patients, it's usually in moderate quantity and also with lots and lots of vegetable materials. If you just take a lot of fruit or you process it in the form of juices and things, you can create some of the same problems we see from too much refined carbohydrates across the board. So we believe that fruit is an acceptable food for most patients, but it has to be used in concert to a vegetable-rich diet. Gut is a tunnel that goes from your mouth to the other hole at the other end. So when you swallow something, it is not in your body. It is in a tunnel that's going through your body, okay? Starts in the mouth, go down the throat, into the stomach, goes to the intestine, the large bowel. Eventually, you're pushing it out the other end. That's essentially what digestion is, shoving stuff in one hole, pushing it out the other. It doesn't get in your body unless it gets through the intestinal mucosa, represented here by the screen, that works very much like a screen does at keeping flies out. The intestinal mucosa keeps everything out except the tiniest molecules, like even protein molecules, too big. It has to be amino acids. Glucose, it has to be small molecules, unless the screen is damaged. And just like a screen that's torn could let flies in, if you have a damaged intestinal mucosa, you can leak materials in, larger molecules, whether it's bacteria, viruses, proteins, and that would stimulate your immune system to have to react to try to suppress it. Well, that's okay as long as your immune system is able to keep up with it. But what if it's happening every day? Eventually, you can develop what we call autoimmune disease, where now the immune system becomes confused and attacks your own tissues. What could cause gut leakage? What could cause damage of your intestinal mucosa? What's an example of something like, what about free radicals? What do you think causes smokers' face here? Why the person of the smoker looks like one side and the other? Can you tell the difference? Yeah, what causes wrinkles? What are wrinkles? Wrinkles are cross-linked collagen tissue that comes from free radicals. One of the best sources of free radicals is smoking. It bathes your entire body with free radicals, which is why only 20% of smokers live long enough to get lung cancer, because they damage the enamel lining of their blood vessels and get heart attacks and strokes before that. You have an autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system is the automatic nervous system. It controls virtually every movement in your body. The things you don't have to think about. If you went out running and your heart didn't speed up, you would die. Does anybody die because they forget to tell their heart to speed up? No, it does it automatically, and what controls that is the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system has sympathetic and parasympathetic branches which work in concert with each other. If your sympathetic nervous system tone gets too high, you could have diarrhea or constipation. If the parasympathetic tone gets too high, you could have diarrhea. So because the peristalsis is regulated by the sympathetic and parasympathetic balance. So what could you do to rebalance the autonomic nervous system? Well, you could do one of the many healing methods that you all hear about, like chiropractic manipulation, physical therapy, meditation, yoga, biofeedback, homeopathy. All of these different therapies, acupuncture, largely work to the degree they help rebalance the autonomic nervous system. Some may work better than others, but basically that's one of the mechanisms by which they relieve your symptoms and your pain. But by far the most powerful way of rebalancing the autonomic nervous system that I've ever come across is fasting. Fasting is like taking a corrupted hard drive, rebooting the hard drive, and watching what happens. It's really quite remarkable. Psychospiritual impact. Isn't it interesting that diametrically opposed religions all have one thing in common? Whether it's the Jain, the Jews, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Christians, they all agree there's a fasting tradition in every one of these practices. Maybe there's a reason, because it changes the way you think about yourself and the world around you. The immune system is enhanced, not suppressed during fasting. Every objective measure of immune system function, from helper killer T cell activity to neutrophil phagocytosis, is enhanced during fasting. And as I mentioned to you with my story about my guy that lived on triple cheeseburgers, taste neuroadaptation is profoundly affected. People get to where good food tastes good.